Chapter 2 Bad Dream. The city slept beneath a shroud of rain, each drop a tiny, insistent drumbeat against the grimy windows of Sal's pawn and trade. Inside, the dim, flickering light from a single bare bulb cast elongated, dancing shadows, turning two figures into grotesque caricatures. Ricky, nimble and wiry as a ferret, moved with practiced ease behind the counter, his fingers, surprisingly delicate for a burglar, sifting through a tangle of necklaces and rings. He hummed a tuneless melody, occasionally stuffing a handful of gleaming trinkets into the gaping maw of a burlap sack. "Hurry up, Ricky," Ben rumbled, his voice a low growl that fought to be heard above the storm's howling crescendo. Ben, a hulking brute with a face that looked like it had lost several arguments with a paving slab, loitered by the door, his eyes, small and piggish, darting between the shadowed interior and the tempest-tossed street. Rain plastered his greasy hair to his forehead, and a nervous tick pulled at the corner of his mouth. Ricky scoffed, not bothering to look up. "Patience, Ben. Gotta make sure we get the good stuff, right? This ain't no five and dime. Sal's got some real treasures." He held up a diamond-encrusted watch, its facets catching the weak light in a brief, blinding flash. "This baby alone could buy us a week in Cancun." Ben grunted, his gaze still fixed on the street. "Cancun sounds good, especially if we ain't stuck in the joint." He shifted his weight, his heavy boots squelching on the wet floor. "Just get a move on. I got a bad feeling about tonight." Ricky finally tore himself away from his plunder, the sack now bulging. "You always have a bad feeling. It's called being a professional, Ben. We're in, we're out, smooth as silk." He slung the sack over his shoulder, the clinking of metal on metal, a muted chime of ill-gotten gains. Outside, an old Volkswagen van, its paint faded to a dull blue, sat innocently at the curb, its owner presumably at home, oblivious to the unfolding drama. Ben, his innate caution suddenly eclipsed by a surge of avarice as he waited for Ricky, eyed the van. A quick score on a parked vehicle just to pass the time? His grubby fingers twitched. He circled the van, his gaze predatory, peering into its dark windows like a hungry wolf scenting a stray. He jiggled the handle of the side door, a smug grin creeping across his smashed pumpkin face as it yielded with a soft click. "Bingo," he muttered, his voice barely audible even to himself, a thrill of petty victory momentarily warming him against the chill rain. As he slid open the door, a low growl, deeper than the distant thunder, vibrated through the air. It wasn't the rumble of an engine starting. It was something ancient, primal, a sound that seemed to steal the breath from the very air. Ben barely had time to register the sound, or the sudden cold dread that gripped him, before something seized him. The world became a blur of savage motion and searing pain. A sleek dark blue form, scales gleaming like obsidian in the flickering streetlights, erupted from the blind spot beside the van. It moved with impossible speed, a blur of muscle and predatory grace. Pale blue eyes, full of a terrifying alien intelligence, locked onto Ben's. This was not a creature of this world. He was a hybrid theropod, a nightmare brought to life, a living weapon of unknown origin. His breath, hot and fetid, washed over Ben's face, carrying the metallic tang of fresh blood. Ben's scream, a raw, guttural sound ripped from the depths of his terrified soul, was cut brutally short. Massive jaws, lined with serrated teeth, clamped down, crushing bone with a sickening crackle that was muffled, yet not entirely silenced, by the deluge of rain. A brief, violent thrash, a final, convulsive tremor, and then silence. A few seconds later, Vargoth, the creature, released Ben's mangled body, dropping it with a wet, sickening thud onto the pavement. Vargoth stood for a moment, head cocked, his blue eyes, like chips of ice, scanning his surroundings, calculating, assessing. His muzzle dripped, scarlet rivulets mingling with the rainwater, washing away a life with horrifying indifference. Ricky, who had just emerged from the pawnshop, the burlap sack still clutched tight in his shaking hands, stared. His jaw hung agape, his eyes wide, with a horror so profound it rendered him immobile. His mind, usually sharp enough for petty theft, was too frantic, too overloaded, to make any sense of what he'd just witnessed. A man, a hulking brute like Ben, reduced to a broken thing in seconds by that. He was rooted to the spot, unable to run, watching the creature's head turn slowly, deliberately, in his direction. His pale blue eyes met his, and in that gaze, Ricky saw not just death, but a cold, ancient hunger that transcended mere predation. Dazed confusion warred with sheer, unadulterated terror. He braced himself, a pathetic whimper catching in his throat, but the creature, for reasons entirely unknown, simply held his gaze for another agonizing moment, then turned. With a silent, fluid movement that belied its immense size, Vargoth vanished into the swirling darkness of the storm, leaving only the rain, the lingering scent of blood, and Ricky's shattered sanity behind. Leo Hashimoto splashed his way through the puddles, his bright blue flip-flops kicking up sprays of dirty water onto the back of his brother, Jake Hashimoto's legs. He sighed, a dramatic exhalation that misted in the cool evening air. They were coming home from the community pool, where they'd just finished another awkward one-on-one swimming class, a task that always left Jake feeling drained and out of place, and Leo feeling, well, mostly bored and a little annoyed. Jake preferred the methodical rhythm of laps to the chaotic splashing of other kids, and the instructor, Ms. Albright, often struggled to bridge the gap between their expectations. Jake, oblivious to Leo's theatrics, his brow furrowed in intense concentration, was meticulously recounting the story of a fictional explorer. His voice, usually a monotone that soothed his neurodivergent mind, now seemed slightly frantic, a little too fast. And then, Jake said, gesturing emphatically with a hand that still smelled faintly of chlorine, Captain Bartholomew, he used the special compass to, oh no. His voice trailed off, his hand flying to his face in a gesture of sudden alarm. My glasses. Leo stopped, exhaling another sigh, this one laced with genuine exasperation. Great. Just great, Jake. Where'd you lose them this time? This is the third time this month. Dad's going to kill us. Jake looked embarrassed, his eyes slightly unfocused without the corrective lenses, scanning the darkening pavement. I don't know. I had them when we left the pool. Maybe by the bushes? Near the big oak tree? His voice was small, vulnerable. Without his glasses, the world blurred, becoming an indistinct, overwhelming wash of shapes and colors that made his anxieties spike. Before Leo could fully launch into a lecture, the familiar, comforting silhouette of their father, John, appeared in the doorway of their house. His face, usually a picture of quiet strength, was etched with worry, lines etched around his eyes that weren't there this morning. You two okay? What took you so long? John's voice was strained, thick with unspoken concern. The news is full of it. They're talking about some creature, they're calling it the Nocturnuvosaur, that escaped from the lab. They said it was last seen in a park. A park? Leo interrupted, his eyes, usually full of cheerful mischief, widening with alarm. That's like, right by here, the community park? John nodded, his lips tightening into a grim line. That's what they said. I just heard it on the radio. They've issued a public safety alert. I need you both to be careful. So no more going out for now, all right? Not until they catch it. He stepped closer, placing a reassuring, though slightly trembling hand on each of their shoulders. Jake started to stammer, his earlier anxiety about his glasses now compounded by this terrifying news. But my glasses. I can't see without them, Dad. I need them for everything. John looked from Jake's distressed face to Leo's worried one, a silent battle playing out in his eyes. He knew how vital those glasses were to Jake's daily navigation of the world, both physical and emotional. Denying him would cause Jake immense distress. And yet, the thought of sending them back out. He sighed, the sound heavy with resignation and fear. Fine. Just be quick. And stay together, please. Don't split up for anything. I'll make dinner. Call me if you find them or if you hear anything. He watched them intently as they turned, his gaze following their retreating figures until they vanished beyond the lamplight. Jake and Leo retraced their steps, the sky above a bruised purple, fading into an inky black as the last vestiges of twilight surrendered to the advancing night. The earlier rain had ceased, but the air remained thick and humid, heavy with the scent of wet earth and damp leaves. Every rustle in the bushes, every snap of a twig beneath their feet, sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through them, setting their nerves on edge. The usual chirping of crickets and distant traffic hum were replaced by an eerie stillness, punctuated only by the occasional drip of water from saturated branches. "Are you sure it was by the bushes, Jake?" Leo whispered, his voice hushed, eyes darting into the deepening shadows of the park. "It's getting really dark." Jake nodded, his pace slower now, his uncorrected vision making it hard to discern shapes. "The big oak tree, remember? Captain Bartholomew always used to hide his treasure maps under big oak trees. I was telling you about it when I tripped." They searched for what felt like an eternity, their strained eyes straining against the gloom. Finally, a glint of metal by the side of the road, nestled amongst the damp leaves and tangled roots of a rosebush. "There!" Leo exclaimed, with relief flooding his voice. He reached down, carefully extricating Jake's glasses. As Leo straightened up, the sound of snapping twigs, louder, closer than any they'd heard before, made them both jump. It wasn't a squirrel, not a stray cat. This was heavy, deliberate. They turned in unison, their hearts hammering against their ribs. A large, dark form broke through the undergrowth, emerging silently from the tree line. It was Vargoth. His sleek obsidian scales shimmered even in the dim light, and his pale blue eyes glowed eerily, twin pinpricks of icy predatory intelligence. Blood, still fresh and glistening, dripped slowly, steadily from his muzzle, a grim testament to a very recent, very quick meal. The smell, faint but undeniably metallic, reached them, overriding the damp earth. Jake's breath hitched, a strangled sound caught in his throat. His mind, already overwhelmed by the fading light, the unfamiliar terrain without his glasses, and the earlier news report, now struggled to process the impossible sight before him. His coping mechanisms, his stories, his meticulous routines, crumbled under the weight of this raw, visceral terror. He grabbed Leo's arm, his voice a trembling whisper, barely audible above the sudden, pounding rush in his ears. "Don't move. Don't make any noise." He knew, with an instinctual clarity that bypassed logic, that this was the Nocturne Nuversor. He could feel its presence, a cold, focused malevolence. But his warning came too late. The creature, perhaps sensing their fear, perhaps simply deciding his moment had arrived, let out a deafening roar. The sound, a guttural shriek that was both primal and impossibly alien, tore through the stillness of the woods, vibrating through their very bones. It sent a flock of unseen birds into frantic, panicked flight, their wings a sudden, chaotic flurry above the trees. Leo, his survival instincts screaming, tore his arm free from Jake's grasp. Years of sibling squabbles, of shared secrets, of loyalty, vanished in an instant, replaced by an overwhelming, primal urge to flee. He bolted, scrambling blindly through the trees, a desperate gasping cry of "Jake, run!" swallowed almost immediately by the echoing roar. Jake, his mind overwhelmed by the sheer sensory onslaught, the roar, the sudden movement of his brother, the looming presence of the beast, froze. His eyes, wide and terrified, fixed on Vargoth. He understood. He understood the predator's intent, the finality of the moment. A scream, raw and tearing, ripped from his throat, a sound of absolute, unadulterated terror, as the beast coiled, then leapt, talons extended, closing the distance with terrifying speed. The following morning, sunlight, weak and watery after the storm, streamed through the window, painting pale rectangles across Damien's bedroom floor. It pulled him from the horrors of the night before, but a thick, unsettling fog clouded his mind. He wasn't sure what he had just experienced. The terrifying clarity of the beast, the desperate flight, the crushing fear, it had been so real. He rubbed his eyes, the residual ache from his unsleeping night, a dull throb behind his temples. Laura sat on the edge of his bed, her face etched with worry, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She had been there for a while, just watching Damien, waiting for him to stir. "You okay, honey? You were tossing and turning all night, crying out in your sleep." Damien nodded slowly, his throat tight, tasting of fear and exhaustion. I think so. I just had a really bad dream." The memory was still too vivid, too fresh, to dismiss entirely, yet too unbelievable to be anything but a nightmare. He didn't mention anything about the dream. He couldn't. It felt too fragile, too real. Laura reached out, gently ruffling Damien's hair. "Well, you can stay home today, Damien. That's okay. You must have been really tired doing your story yesterday. Maybe that's why you dreamed about, well, about whatever you dreamed about." Laura searched her son's face, hoping for some sign of reassurance, some flicker of his usual, steady self. But Damien's eyes, even with his glasses now firmly on his nose, seemed distant, preoccupied. "Are you sure you're okay? You look pale." Despite the lingering unease and the strange visceral phantom pain in his chest, a stubborn refusal to give in took hold of Damien. He didn't understand why, but a deep, inexplicable pull towards the familiar, towards routine, towards the sanctuary of their Sunday ritual, asserted itself. "No," he said, his voice stronger now, surprising even himself. "I want to go to church." Laura looked at him, her brow furrowed, a flicker of concern crossing her face. "Okay, Damien, but if you feel ill or anything, you have to tell me. Immediately, okay?" Damien nodded, a sense of grim determination setting in. He needed to be there. He needed to find some comfort, some answer, some way to make the lingering terror subside. Later, surrounded by the familiar hymns that echoed through the small chapel, and the comforting cadence of J.T. Talley's voice as he preached from the pulpit, Damien found a moment of fragile peace in the back pew. The scent of old wood, beeswax, and dusty hymnals was a soothing balm, a grounding anchor in the wake of his internal storm. J.T.'s words, a gentle sermon about faith and overcoming darkness, washed over him, a warm current against the icy residue of his dream. But exhaustion, a deep, pervasive weariness that seeped into his bones, tugged relentlessly at his eyelids. The gentle, rhythmic drone of J.T.'s voice, intended to soothe and enlighten, became a hypnotic lullaby. Damien fought it, blinking hard, trying to focus on the stained glass window depicting a serene shepherd, but the battle was lost. His mind, already frayed and vulnerable, drifted, pulled inexorably back to the terrifying landscape of his subconscious. And soon, he was back in the woods. The comforting sounds of the church dissolved, replaced by the chilling whisper of wind through skeletal branches. The familiar scent of wood and beeswax twisted into the damp, decaying smell of leaf litter. He was there again, heart hammering, every nerve alive with primal fear. The screech of the creature, though silent in the hushed confines of the church, echoed in his ears with brutal clarity, a phantom sound that pierced the very core of his being. The fear, cold and sharp, gripped him anew, tighter than before. The world around him dissolved into a hazy nightmare as he became Jake. The pews melted into gnarled tree trunks, the stained glass into a sickly, bruised purple sky. Jake could feel the uneven ground beneath his feet, the damp chill permeating his clothes. The monster was hunting him again, his presence a palpable, suffocating weight in the dream forest. He could feel Vargoth's intelligent eyes on him, a relentless, unerring pursuit. He could hear the faint, almost imperceptible rustle of scales against leaves, the heavy, deliberate tread of its feet, always just out of sight, always closing in. He ran, breathless, through the tangled undergrowth, his uncorrected vision blurring the trees into an endless, inescapable labyrinth. He ducked, he weaved, he stumbled, his mind screaming with a terror that transcended the physical. There was no Leo here, no father, no sanctuary. This time, there was no escape. He could feel the hot, fetid breath on his neck, the ground vibrating with its approach. The icy blue eyes were upon him, vast and terrible, filled with an ancient, patient hunger. The dream tightened its grip, pulling him deeper, showing him the inevitable, the impossible, the profound terror of being utterly, completely alone. And so it goes.